Hi there, this is Teri from stampinmagic.com. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to show you how to use the Big Shot Embossing Mats from Stampin Up. You get 3 parts to this kit: a hard plastic white impressions pad, and then 2 silicone mats, a thin blue one and a thicker grey one. You always use the impressions pad with one of the silicone mats, and depending on what you want to do determines which silicone mat to use. So if you want to cut out a framelit or thinlet and then emboss it, you would use the grey mat. However, if you just wanted to emboss the shape of a framelit or thinlet into your cardstock, then you would use the blue mat. In the packaging, you do get full instructions in 4 languages. Now, at the bottom of each language section, you get a key, and this refers down to the Big Shot sandwiches that are shown at the bottom of the leaflet. Now, the top diagram just shows you what a normal sandwich looks like, so if you were cutting normal framelits or thinlets. The bottom left shows you the sandwich you need if you want to cut using a framelit or thinlet and then emboss with that same framelit. The final diagram shows you the sandwich needed for when you just want to emboss using a framelit. I'm going to start by showing you how I created the background layer on this card. You can see the embossing quite clearly. Nothing's been cut. The shape of the edgelet, in this case, has just been embossed into the side edges of the card. Now I have a basic grey cardstock mat, and I'm going to emboss it using one of the delicate lace edgelets. I'm using the largest one. And all I'm going to do is tape it to one of the side edges. So I'm lining up the points as close to the edge of the card as I can get them, and then I'm centering the die on either end of the cardstock, and then I'll just tape that in place just to hold it so it doesn't move when I put it through the Big Shot. Okay, so first of all I need my Big Shot platform. I don't need the thin die adapter. Now you must ensure when you use these mats for embossing that your cutting edge is facing upwards. So I found the easiest way to do that is to put a cutting pad down, then put my cardstock with my die taped to it on, and then another cutting pad on top, and then flip it. This helps to ensure that your die doesn't move on your cardstock at all. Okay, so once you've got your die facing upwards, you need to add your blue silicone mat, because we're just going to emboss, we're not cutting anything, and then your impressions pad, and then you just run that through the Big Shot. And if I remove the impressions pad and the mat, you can see that the embossing's complete. So now we're going to repeat that for the other side. So I'm going to align my die first of all and stick that down. Making sure it's centered along that edge. Okay, now the cutting edge is facing down at the moment, so I've added my other cutting pad and I'm going to flip it and remove that top pad, add my blue silicone mat and my impressions pad, and then run it through the Big Shot again to do that second edge. And then we have it, both edges are now embossed. Now you may be wondering what would happen if you used the thicker grey mat instead of the thin blue mat when you do this. So I thought I would show you the type of result that you could get. Now on the right hand side I used the blue mat, the thin mat, and on the left hand side I used the thicker grey mat. You can see straight away that you get a much deeper impression with the embossing, and it also embossed the straight edge of the die onto my card as well, so you need to be aware of that. Also, the embossing was so deep in some places that it went right through the card, and on the raised portions of this embossing it's also quite cracked. So using the thicker grey mat will work, but you're not necessarily going to get better results with it. I have another sample to show you where I've used both the mats. Again, on the right hand side I used the thin blue mat just to emboss a piece of card, which could be a card front. And then on the left hand side I used the thicker grey mat. So again, I got a much more detailed and deeper impression with the embossing, but around the edges of the shape and also towards the edge of the card I did get some creasing, and in places it did go right through the cardstock again. Now on to today's project. I'm going to create a version of this card. It's going to look very similar. I'm just going to change one or two things about it. The sentiment comes from the Floral Frames stamp set, and I'm going to change this and use the hello this time. All the various foliage elements on this card were cut using the foliage framelit dies, and I used the grey mat this time to emboss them as well. The little bird was cut using one of the Birds and Blooms thinlit dies, and this was just cut in the normal way. I didn't emboss it. I'm starting with my Big Shot platform and adding the thin die adapter and one of the cutting plates, then placing my cardstock and the frame die that I want to use. So this is just a normal cutting sandwich for a thin die, and then I'm running that through the Big Shot to cut it. Then I'm going to pick up the two cutting plates, remove the thin die adapter, flip the cutting plates, so I've now got the cutting edge up on the die. I can get rid of that top plate, add my grey mat, and then the impressions pad, and just run that through the Big Shot again. And that's all there is to it. It's very simple to do and use these embossing mats. And here I hope you can see the lovely embossed detail that you get when you use this mat. The one on the left shows you what it would look like without the embossing mat being used. Now to cut some of the foliage that I need. So I've set my sandwich up as a normal cutting sandwich again. I'm adding crushed curry, old olive and some more Blackberry Bliss cardstock, and then placing the dies with the cutting edge down. I did try and cut all these together, but it didn't quite work out, as you'll see, with the little fern leaves. So I had to do those again afterwards. So I've run it through the Big Shot. I've removed the thin die adapter and flipped my plates. Now sometimes when you remove that top plate, the dies or the cardstock will stick to the plate, but you just reinsert the dies and then turn them over again so the cutting edge is upwards. Then I'm adding my grey embossing mat and my impressions pad and running it through the Big Shot once again. I will just show you one last time how to do this for the remaining leaves and things that I need. So I'm setting up my cutting sandwich first of all, adding my dies with the cutting edge down, and then my top cutting plate and running that through. Then I'm going to remove my thin die adapter, flip the cutting plates and remove that top one. And again, some of my dies came out from the cardstock, so I've reinserted those, added my grey embossing mat, my white impressions pad, and then run it through again to do the embossing. And that's it. I'm using balmy blue ink for the sentiment. And I'm punching that out using the 2-inch circle punch. And then I'm going to run that through the Big Shot with the subtle embossing folder. Then I have a Whisper White mat for the front of the card, which I'm going to emboss using the Layered Leaves folder. I love the effect that you get with each of these folders. They're two of my favourites. I can now start putting my card together. So first of all, I have half a sheet of cardstock, and I've scored this to create a landscape card, and this is in Blackberry Bliss. For the front of the card, I have a balmy blue layer, and then I have my embossed Whisper White mat. For the inside of the card, I have another Whisper White mat. I have a strip of balmy blue cardstock and another strip of Whisper White that I've embossed using the Layered Leaves folder again. So I'm just adding that Whisper White strip to the blue strip, just so there's a little bit of balmy blue showing on the top, and then I'll trim that down to size using my guillotine. And I don't measure any of this, I just use up little scraps of the cardstock that I've got handy and then trim them to size. Then I'll add glue on the reverse of that strip and position it at the bottom of that Whisper White mat, and then trim off any excess that there might be on the sides. That whole panel can then be positioned inside the card. The balmy blue and Whisper White mats can be glued together, and then this can be positioned onto the front of the card. I went ahead and die cut the crushed curry bird and also one in Blackberry Bliss. I'm going to add my sentiment panel to my embossed frame. And because when I punched it out, I positioned the sentiment slightly higher on the circle, I've got room underneath it to add my bird. I'm not going to use the Blackberry Bliss bird, but I am going to use the little eyepiece and the little wing piece from the die cut. So I'm just adding glue to those sections on my crushed curry bird, and then I'll inlay those pieces using my pickup tool. I added dimensionals to the reverse of this panel, and now I can position it onto the front of my card. I can now start to add all the various bits of foliage around that centre frame. And because it's raised up on dimensionals, it's really easy just to slot the leaves and things underneath. And if I find that there's a dimensional in the way and I can't quite get it underneath, then I'll just trim it slightly just so it fits. Finally, to finish off this card and to add a little bit of sparkle, I'm just going to add a few of our basic rhinestones onto that sentiment panel. And that's it, we're all done. So here are the two cards together. Which one do you prefer? I prefer the new one, I think. I like the white background and I like the inlay on the bird. I think that looks really nice. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.